the second episode of Outright on Air, recording from the Outright Youth Center in Hickory, North Carolina. My name is Faith. I'll be your host for this evening. She pronouns, thank you. I'm joined by three wonderful panelists today. Kadin, let's start with you. I want your name, pronouns, and also your age, because it's going to be pertinent to today's episode.
I'm Kadin, he and they pronouns, and 16.
Michael?
Hey, Mike. I'm 51, and he.
And I'm at 70, he and his.
Awesome. Let's just take a quick look at the calendar coming up. Of course, this is going up on Father's Day, so happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. So this Monday, of course, like every Monday, we do have the youth group, which will be meeting from 6 to 8 p.m. Then youth drop-in will be from 3 to 6 p.m. on Wednesday evening. Then next week on Wednesday, on the 28th, in addition to youth drop-in from 3 to 6, we also have adult transgender support, which meets at 7 p.m. And that day is also the anniversary of the Stonewall riots, which very important moment in LGBT history, and also the kickoff of Pride. So on that note, let's kick off talking about Pride. This is Pride Month. Hope everybody's having a good Pride Month so far. Who here got to go to one of the marches on the 11th? Anybody?
I was in D.C.
In D.C.?
This is it.
I went to Charlotte. It was fantastic. Did either of y'all go to any of the marches?
No, I was busy.
I was supporting from my living room sofa. Yes.
And we liked your support. I felt it. I felt it right
Did
here.
you? Excellent.
So you went to D.C. How was that?
It was an excellent experience, an excellent crowd. D.C. Pride was actually this weekend as well. So it was on Saturday, and then the March for Equality and Unity was on Sunday. It was amazing to see that many gay men out at 10 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. But it was an excellent crowd. It took about 2 hours for the parade to get from where they gathered down to the Capitol, past the White House. Apparently the D.C. police thought it would be a relatively mild event because there were only 6 police out front and only 2 snipers on the roof. So apparently they assumed it would be a relatively organized and orderly crowd, and it was.
Did they learn nothing from the Women's March?
I don't think the women actually tried to approach the White House either, so that's, they were well organized. So, but it was excellent. It was good to see their turnout. Mandy Carter of North Carolina was one of the lead speakers, and it's always nice to have local people present on the national stage.
Awesome. So we are talking Pride on tonight's episode. So I brought you all here for a very specific reason. You each represent a different generation going through the Pride movement, whether it be for gender identity or sexual orientation or both, however that goes for you. So what I want to know is, I want this to be a conversation about meeting each other on those experiences that only your generation knows. And I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. So Ed, I want to start with you. So you're the oldest amongst us here, and therefore you've seen Pride since the earliest days.
Correct.
Right. So what I'm really interested to know from you is, what was it like before like it really took off, before it became in the national spotlight at all? Like even if it was still being scoffed or mocked or whatever the case may be, when it was still just in the back alleys, in the hushed whispers, you didn't bring it out to the forefront. What was that like compared to, say, now?
That may be a faulty premise, because I've never known a Pride to be anywhere other than out and in your face. The first Pride that I'm aware of was 1970, and was the 1-year anniversary of the Stonewall riots in 1969, which is why June is Pride Month. And it was a march to commemorate the event on June 28th, 1970, down Broadway in New York. That's pretty in your face. The first North Carolina Pride that I was aware of was 1981, and again was in Durham, and was a parade that marched down 9th Street at East Campus at Duke. So it was an event rather than something that was quiet Now, the press coverage has changed. And the main press coverage that has changed in the 80s and 90s in North Carolina, if you saw a Pride event on TV, you saw the fringes of the LGBT movement. You didn't see the mainstream movement. Now I think television and newspapers are better at recording the mainstream LGBT movement that is using Pride as a celebration. And over the last few years, it's gone from political to less political and more celebratory, although there's always been the celebratory part of it.
That was always at the heart. It's just that then radiated out, right? Like,
well,
it was celebratory for those in it.
Correct. And I should say that I didn't come out until 1991. And my first Pride was 1992 in Asheville. And again, they were always political in the early days. Very political. And I brought, just so I would have it, in the early days of Pride, North Carolina, it was always in the Triangle because that was the most, I guess, gay-friendly place. Then in the early 90s, they started rotating it out. So it would go to Asheville, then back to the Triangle, then Charlotte, then back to the Triangle, then Winston-Salem, then back to the Triangle. So that the idea was to spread it around the state so that each community could have something local as often as they could. And for example, when Pride was in Charlotte in 1996, Out Charlotte grew out of that event and became an annual event in Charlotte. So that's when Charlotte started its first Pride celebration.
If you don't mind me asking, that first Pride, you said on the 1-year anniversary of Stonewall, how old were you then?
Oh, my math is not that good.
You can
22, okay. 23.
So what I'm really interested in is the feeling of seeing that out in your face. This is who we are, literally marching down the street, compared to 22 years before that.
Well, there was no such thing 22 years before.
Exactly. So that's what I'm asking. Is like, how did that make you feel?
I mean, there had been events in D.C. that I was not aware of, and there had been protests and demands for workplace rights in the federal government and things of that nature. Because if you were a gay person in the federal government, you had no security clearance. People felt like you could be blackmailed. You could not be out and proud and work in the federal government.
Nowadays, we call that working with the Russians.
Correct. But again, it was covered in the national press, like the three main Newsweekly magazines, Newsweek, Time, and U.S. News and World Report. It was probably covered by the New York Times. I can't say the Washington Post because I don't know. But it was certainly not covered in local papers. There was absolutely no mention of it that I can recollect in any local papers. It took several years following that before even routine stuff would start showing up in local papers. And it took a while after that for the word gay to start being used. I don't remember exactly what the terminology was, except in news reports, which were always about someone getting arrested. You would have abnormal, abhorrent, words like that. And I don't remember those words were used with the early gay pride celebrations in the news coverage, but they were more looked upon as unusual or freak events as opposed to Chamber of Commerce type events.
Yeah. All right, Michael, I want to move to you. So your generation is more growing up as the movement grows, and I'm willing to bet you saw the most explosive growth in going from those early days to now, where genuinely speaking, it's at least more widely understood. Maybe not. It's more widely accepted. Yeah, it's still not fully accepted, obviously, but more fully understood. We're getting closer to that point. So, as an LGBT person growing up as the movement grows, what kind of things did you see? How did the changes affect your sense of self and how you perceived pride in both like your community and as a national whole?
Okay. Well, I grew up in a nearby town, Cherryville. And I was in high school in the early 80s.
You're one of the only people who pronounces it Cherryville.
I knew you were going to say that.
I'm so proud of you.
It's the gay gene, I guess,
Yeah.
kicking in there. So, and
Lenore is actually Lenoir, by the way.
right. Well, I was in high school in the early 80s. So back then, and also growing up in a small town, I didn't even know what Pride was. I had never heard of it. I actually kind of learned about being gay and the society through the AIDS movement, really. And I remember I was in 9th or 10th grade and watching the news, and they were talking about gay men were getting this disease. And I remember at that time, my fear wasn't getting sick and dying. My fear was, oh my gosh, if this is something genetic or whatever that only gay people get, and I get sick, people are going to know I'm gay. So it was a very much coming out fear, not of the disease, but of losing everyone who loved me, right? Because in the 80s, especially in Cherryville, no one was gay. Or no one you knew was gay, right? And the only people that were okay with being gay were gay people. And I had like maybe 1 or 2 friends.
Yeah.
So that was really tough. So I went to Appalachian State, and it actually, yes.
Class of 09.
Okay. 1989. So that's scary. But anyway, it was probably I remember in 1994, I went to Washington because they had, I believe it was 94, they had the AIDS quilt on display up there. My best friend had recently died of HIV. So that was my first touch of seeing gay society and open and affirming events and things like that. So that kind of changed me a lot. It was well into the 90s, if not close to 2000, before I ever went to a Pride event. So I've seen it completely change in my lifetime. I remember in the 90s having conversations with my gay friends, and they would say something like, do you think we'll ever be able to get married? And I remember very clearly saying, not in our lifetime. That will never happen. So it actually snuck up on me a little bit. Society changed quicker than I thought, and now I'm very active in some of the Pride organizations. I'm with Catawba Valley Pride now, and thrilled that society and myself have changed enough that the world can be a better place.
And if I could interject here one thing, that's a huge change from when I came out. That local communities the size of Hickory have Pride events. North Carolina struggled to have a Pride event in North Carolina. And when it went away from the Triangle, participation dropped off because it was an odd event in a community like Asheville.
And the sad thing is that even in like the smallest of the smaller communities, we're still having those problems. Morganton last year had their very first Pride event ever, and it had a good turnout, but it also was met with incredible hostility. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of protests. The person who put it on, his car was vandalized. He received multiple death threats. So I mean, it's the smaller and more rural your communities go, it's still that hard to put one of these on.
Well, that's just where North Carolina was 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. As a state. So now that there are pockets where a community can actually come together and have a Pride event is what starts the change in that community.
All right, Kadin, I want to move on to you. Now, you are obviously the youngest person here. And I like that you're wearing an End AIDS t-shirt after what Michael just talked about. Now, how old are you again?
60.
Oh my God. So, you know what it's like to be a youth now in this environment of everything that Michael's generation and Ed's generation have basically fought for to get to this point. And it is a lot better now than it was even when I was going to high school. When I went to high school, I remember one out lesbian in the entire school, and I graduated with like 300 kids. And nobody talked about gender identity back then, so I didn't figure out that I was trans until like 2 years after I graduated high school. But I also didn't go to high school with internet prevalence and smartphones and Facebook, and these are things that have, for good and ill, transformed the Pride movement. So I want you to talk about how you've seen social media and just the interconnectivity of digital media as a whole affect the way Pride is looked at by your generation, especially in school, because none of us have been in school for a very long time.
Well, I think social media definitely makes it a lot easier for both cyberbullying and coming out, because personally for me, I recently came out on Facebook with my family, and I didn't message them, I didn't tell them anything, I just changed my name on Facebook and changed my pronouns and let them figure it out on their own. No one's questioned me about it so far, so that's probably a good thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It also does, like, I also see a lot more hate I would at my school, because I go to a really inclusive school, and part of our slogan is we don't against gender expression, race, sexuality, any of that.
Does your school have a straight gay alliance or any kind of club like that?
Yeah, we have a GSA.
Nice. Okay.
Yes.
I know a lot of the Hickory schools don't. I've been told that at least, so makes me happy to hear that. So do you think social media made it easier to come out?
I think it did, yeah. But I remember when I was going to change my name, it said you can't change. You hit enter, and I was like, oh my god, do I really want to do this?
Yeah, I actually remember that too, because before I came out to my parents, I unblocked them on Facebook. They didn't know I had my real account, and I unblocked them in preparation to tell them, and then they found the account before I got to tell them. So that didn't go over well, but that's a personal story. So yeah, it does change the way coming out, or just the prevalence of knowledge about LGBT is out there, because if you think about it, you talk about these Pride demonstrations that you went to that, we're sort of small, but we're sort of in that realm of not getting the national attention. And now we're in an age where you can hold up your phone at, Pride Morganton or Pride Catawba and literally broadcast it to the world right there. Mm-hmm. So it's never been easier to interact with demographics that aren't your own.
Right.
So is that something either of you think you would have wished you'd had during your eras of the Pride movement?
Well, I have mixed emotions, and the reason I have mixed emotions is I did not figure out that I was gay until after college. And I married at the end of college and had a child. So had I figured it out earlier, I don't know that would have happened. And having a child is one of the great events of someone's life. How that has changed is when I came out in 1991, there were no nurseries in any gay churches. There is now not a gay church that I'm aware of that does not have a nursery. So I think the opportunity to be a parent is now there for the LGBT community when it was not in the 1960s and early 1970s. So that I would not change. But yes, I would have given anything not to go through the struggle I went through once I figured it out. And the internet played a part, very much so, in the 80s and 90s. Even though it was brand new, a lot of people were discovering...
It was text on a screen.
Correct. But still, a lot of people were discovering things like chat rooms, so they could talk with others that were like them, and they discovered they weren't the Lone Ranger. They weren't the only person in the world who felt that way. And a clear example of that was my generation typically came out somewhere between 28 and 30. Now people are coming out at 12 and 14. And that's because they can connect and they have role models. I had no role models. There were no role models in the LGBT community when I grew up. They didn't exist. Just like Michael said, they were there, obviously, but they were not visible in any way, shape, or form. The internet changed that almost overnight.
I can't imagine coming out as trans in a world without your Sarah McBrides and your Laverne Coxes and so many other trailblazers that we've had in that regard that are not only, being out about who they are, but like having very successful lives because they're movie stars. They're celebrities in every sense of the word. Mm-hmm. And that kind of representation matters. Like it matters a whole lot. It gives legitimacy to yourself, whether it should be that way or not, because obviously it shouldn't be that way, but it doesn't change the fact that it is. Because, before you would have a situation where, like, if you came out to your parents as trans, it's like, well, I don't understand that. That doesn't make any sense. Why this is just a phase. All the staple things. Now it can be, I'm like Laverne Cox, or I'm like Sarah McBride, and right. It's like, okay, so you have that reference point now, right? To where that's a whole lot. Would you agree with that? Do you think?
Yeah, that's part of the reasons why I'm glad I was born in my generation, with the exception of Donald Trump and Mike Pence, because I don't. I do have a lot of like.
Spoiler alert! Neither do we.
There's a lot more representation now to like say, yeah, I'm like him, and like them a video to help explain it.
What kind of resources did you use to come to understand your gender identity? Because I remember because I came out to myself really in the around 2005, 2007, that time. So it's still prevalent internet. And yeah, I Googled a lot of stuff and I watched a lot of videos and I joined a lot of chat rooms. What things did you look at online, or what sources did you seek, and how did they help you?
I used YouTube because there's this guy on YouTube, Chase Ross, and he makes a lot of trans-related clicked when I was like 13 that was me, but I wasn't able to get the guts to tell my mom until a couple months before my 5th birthday.
All right, Michael, I want to go back to something you mentioned, because you brought up the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and I'm really curious, how did the prevalence of that, did it sort of fuel the growth of Pride? Because since everyone was calling it the gay disease, therefore as we talk about AIDS, we are of course also then having to talk about homosexuality.
Right.
So for good or ill, it made it a household talking point. Am I right?
I think so.
So how did that affect the Pride movement? And Ed, you can weigh in on this too.
Yeah, sure. I think it was definitely a segue from the AIDS movement into Pride in the environment I was in. Anyway, probably not so much in the larger cities, but those of us that were affected by having friends and loved ones with HIV and who died, we were called to be very active in that. So it wasn't a huge leap, I think, for my friends and family to look at me and say, oh, here's this guy that's very active in the AIDS movement and he's doing all these things. Yeah, he's probably gay too. Right, so I think it helped me make that transition. Honestly, in the 80s, in my world, I didn't have reference documents. I didn't, when I went to Appalachian, I actually went to a support group. There was a gay support group, and it was run by the psychologist there, and there was 6 or 8 of us, and it wasn't talking about society and rights or anything like that. It was, how do you deal with the stress and acceptance of being who you are. It was a completely different world back then.
Fast forward several years from that, I was in school there when they dedicated the LGBT Center.
See, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, amazing.
I was at the dedication ceremony.
Fantastic.
I think AIDS let the LGBT community discover that it did have political power. ACT UP was an amazing organization. They didn't take any guff from anybody, including the LGBT community, because there were a lot of people in the LGBT community who felt like ACT UP was wrong, that was pushing the envelope too far, that they were misbehaving, they were giving the community a bad name. And what they accomplished was they speeded up the FDA's process of approving new drugs dramatically. And they made the federal government react when the federal government was doing absolutely nothing. And that exploded the Pride movement, because once the LGBT community discovered that it could make something happen, then it wanted more to happen. And that required more people to come in and do it. And then again, the marriage thing was not a fight that the LGBT community picked. It was sort of thrust upon us, and we fought back. That was sort of how that developed. And again, by fighting back, we were protecting what little right we had, but we were wanting more. And I think now you're going to see the political movement become much stronger again, because now we are going to protect even harder the rights that we gained over the last 20 years that are now under threat. And I think the LGBT community will respond every bit as dramatically and as vigorously as we did to the AIDS crisis in the 80s, and then as we did to start championing rights we wanted in the 90s and the 2000s.
You're actually jumping into the topic I want to close on, so I'm going to cut you off there. That's fine. So another thing, Michael, that you brought up was I never expected gay marriage to happen in my lifetime.
Right.
Those are the words that you said. So I'm sure from the earliest days to now, there's been a lot of we'll never see that we did see.
Right.
And it's beyond just the marriage thing. What are some other things that that either of you thought you'd never see, but there are now? Like for me, it's I didn't really think I'd see authentic trans representation in a major TV show, but now we've got Laverne Cox in Orange Is the New Black, and we've got her name is escaping me, but she plays Sense8, and these are major shows that are not only having trans characters, but they're played by trans people.
Right.
And actually, there's a show on one of the pay networks, I can't remember, but it actually has a non-binary character, and it's played by a non-binary person, and that's something I thought I'd never see. So what are some of those other I never thought I'd see this moments? And Kate, you can jump in on this second part. Do you have any now? Is the sky the limit at this point, or are there still things that you just don't think you'll see progression lead to?
I think probably one of the biggest things for me, and even though we don't have federal protection in the workplace, the last couple companies I've worked for, they did not discriminate against gay people, right? And it's part of their bylaws. We're a protected class there. I think that's becoming more and more the norm. Hopefully that will eventually happen federally for all of us. But I think that's one of the hardest parts of my life is back in the 90s, early 90s, when I was right out of college, had my first job with a very large corporation, and my manager found out I was gay and just very openly said, I'm going to fire you because I don't like you, I don't like gay people, and you're not going to be here very long. So I kind of freaked out, and I remember calling Cleveland, Ohio, to the corporate office and talked to the HR department. And back then, it was just like, oh gosh, that's really a shame. We're sorry this is happening to you. And and that's all they could say, because there was no protection or understanding back then of why would that be a big deal, right? So later on in years, that manager called me back and apologized because for something in his I don't know what it was, something in his life changed, and he had gay friends, and he sought me out to just say he was sorry. And so now I think that's probably the biggest thing for me.
Since you're looking at me, as an attorney, it was very hard to tell a client when they came in and had been terminated, like in Michael's case, that they had no rights. It would drive me crazy. But sometimes you could find a way to skin a cat another way. And sometimes they would have violated the Americans with Disabilities Act in another way. Because the Americans with Disabilities Act is so good, it specifically says it does not apply to homosexuality. But if someone was ill or had a disease and their supervisor found out they were gay and terminated them, frequently the supervisor would forget that he needed or she needed to take the steps to meet the requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act before they terminated somebody. So he could come in through a side door. That was rare, but you started looking for those little instances where you could find an instance of that situation. Also, the law began to develop that employers that did have good LGBT policies had to follow them. They couldn't just ignore them because the law was on their side if they didn't have the policy. But once they put the policy in place, then they had to follow it. So gay attorneys and attorneys representing gay people started holding employers' feet to the fire to follow the policies they had put down on paper.
And one thing I find amazing, like this is just like recent news, is we've been fighting so long to get that federally protected status. And it's also true for transgender people. It's not just gender.
Right.
It's not just sexual orientation. But it's been really interesting to see so many courts now ruling in our favor based on old laws.
Right.
Title IX is consistently being ruled in favor of trans students now.
Right.
The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal ruled in favor of a trans student. So it's been an interesting circumvent of that problem, in that, well, we don't have an administration that's going to protect us, but we seem to have courts that are interpreting the law in a way that is favorable to us. So that's been nice.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kadin, you've grown up in, like I said, in the wake of what all has happened, and these two have seen a lot of ceilings shattered. Do you see any ceilings that you think are just impermeable, or is the rush of progress we've had just make you feel optimistic that there is no limit?
Me feel optimistic, but I wish that the government would get through their minds that trans student rights are more important than sports.
Yeah, human rights are more important than sports, but the things that I used to fight about as an attorney when I had LGBT clients, adoptions, you had to go through the facade of the partner being a roommate, and you knew which adoption agency you wanted to conduct the home study. Rarely was it the County Department of Social Services. You wanted a private agency like the North Carolina Children's Home, which was very good, and then wrote the report so that it would be available for the judge to read appropriately. They never denied the fact that there was a second adult in the household, but that adult was a roommate, and they wrote the report that way so that the single parent could adopt a child. Now a gay couple can adopt a child, so that ceiling has fallen.
Although a lot of local legislators are trying very hard to put it back up.
Sure.
Which is a shame.
Well, I don't think the federal rules will allow it, because if you're married, you're married, and all the rights of marriage go with that.
Yeah.
So I think that one is solved, and they can't go back on marriage, because you can't have a group of people that are legitimately married and then stop it.
Yeah.
And have people that can't marry, or people who could divorce and then who could not remarry.
California tried that and it didn't work.
It didn't work.
It didn't work at all.
I don't think there are ceilings. I think yesterday's election in Virginia of a trans candidate in a primary is absolutely fantastic.
That was, my heart soared.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. And election optional situations are the ones that will be the last to fall. The workplace rights will come, and that will be mandated by the government, but you can't tell people how to vote. You can't tell people who to go to church with. You can't tell people who to accept and who not to accept in the bridge club. Mm-hmm. Those will come down the path eventually, but they won't be at the head of the line. But I did not think I would see marriage in my lifetime until about 15 years ago. Then I thought, okay. And then about 10 years ago, my father, who was in his 80s, I told him he would see marriage in his lifetime. And he did, before he died. So I think we're going to have a minor setback here for 4 years, hopefully only 4 years.
You're getting into my final topic again. So just like poke you with a cattle prod. All right, so for this next part, we're gonna hopefully not get a little too argumentative here, but this goes out to anybody. Is there anything about your experience with Pride that maybe you don't think the other generation understands? Like, for what I mean by that, generations don't always see eye to eye from either cultural or economic or whatever issues that they are exposed to. So, like, for example, people think, Kadin, that your generation takes things for granted. Sometimes, I'm not saying you do, I'm just saying that those kind of notions are there, whether they're true or not. So is there anything about a different generation from your own that you either don't think they get about you, or that you would like to know more about them? Ed has the biggest grin on his face.
I think that's an impossible question, Kate. Unless there's something right in front of you, that's just a lot of territory to cover. But if there is something, speak right up.
Okay, let me lead it off this way. Do you both think that Kadin's generation respects, or at least honors in the correct way, what you two had to fight for? Or do you think it's taken for granted? Do you think it's, swept under the rug? It's considered blasé? Because for a lot of young people now, they've grown up in an environment where gay is a household term.
Right.
So do you think that they've come to take that as a given?
I don't necessarily think it's taken for granted. It's just not part of everyday life. I mean, it is to some extent. Everyone experiences discrimination in some form, within their lifetime, right? So I don't particularly view it that way. Ed lived in harder times than I did in certain ways. And certain ways he can probably say he's thankful for some of those times. In the 80s, I was not the most disciplined teenager, right? So I can't imagine me growing up with the internet and gay.com and Grindr and all that kind of stuff when I was 15 or 16. I think that would have been a recipe for disaster for me. So in a way, I'm thankful those things weren't there, because I wasn't mature enough and didn't have role models to lead me through those things. On the other hand, it would have been great to have some information, right? The only information when I was a teenager was like dirty magazines, right? Not the best source of information growing up, right? So, I don't look at the younger generation. I'm kind of, and think that they take it for granted. I'm thankful they don't have to go through maybe as much as we did, but they certainly still go through it.
Yeah.
We're not there yet, right? Everybody experiences a degree of it.
Everybody is still having to come out. Everybody wrestles with that in our community. That's the one thing we all have in common. Every one of us has a coming out story. That's not true in the heterosexual community.
Mm-hmm.
When I was working with Equality North Carolina in the early 2000s, we all figured out that we were part of the LGBT community. We were gay, lesbian, bi, or trans internally first. And we wrestled with it first. Again, that's not true in the heterosexual community. So heterosexual people, a lot of them, think that we made a choice to be a part of the LGBT community. We made a choice to be gay, or we made a choice to be lesbian, or we made a choice to be trans. Instead of asking that person, did you make a choice? Because that's a yes or a no answer. I would ask them to describe for me the process they went through when they made the decision to be heterosexual. Tell me what the points were that they thought were important. And what the
I wrestled with it for so many years.
what the throwaway points were, because that makes them stop and think. And when they say, I didn't go through that process, then I would respond, neither did I. The process I went through was whether to be honest with who I already was.
I'm always entertained by people who still say, well, being gay is a choice, or being trans is a choice. It's like, okay, let's even, for the sake of argument, say, sure, it's a choice. What's a choice based on? A choice.
Well, why is that wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Even if it was a choice, A, that wouldn't be wrong. But B, choices are based on something. I choose to have certain food over another because that's my preference. I choose to, buy the blue car over the red car because it's my favorite color. It speaks to who I am as a person, the choices I make. So people do not choose to be gay or choose to be trans. They choose to be open about it.
Correct.
Right.
They choose to be authentic, or they choose to live a lie. That's the only choice that's involved there. Now, got one more thing I want to bring up, and now we can finally talk about the thing you keep hinting about. During the Obama years, we saw an explosion of progress for LGBT. I still remember sobbing like a baby when the White House was lit up in rainbows last June.
Me too.
That
Yep.
I've cried harder than I can remember. What a moment. I also cried the first time the word transgender was said in a State of the Union address.
Mm-hmm.
Again, monumental. And we had 8 wonderful years of feeling like things were unstoppable. You know, and even with Obama himself, we went from a president who campaigned on marriages between a man and a woman to I fully support LGBT rights.
Right.
You know, so even our leader grew as the nation grew. So all of this snowballed into this feeling of we are unstoppable. Now Trump has happened. And is that now we have Donald Trump as president, and that will never not feel weird to say. We have the same right-wing control that we saw back during the second Bush administration, the second term of George W. You know, where he had a Republican legislator at his back, and they were trying to pass, you know, constitutional amendments to ban gay marriage, and it was a scary time.
Yeah.
So finding ourselves at this point where the steamroller might not just stop, but maybe go back. What is everybody's feelings on this, especially for Kadin? How do you feel with this notion of, you know, your most formative years were with the Obama administration, so LGBT progress is all you've known, and now this, correct me if I'm wrong, this is really your first experience with backslide. So what are your feelings on that?
I'm extremely scared of the next 4 years because I don't know what's gonna happen. Not nice. I don't like him. I'm sorry. I'm trying to not like.
No, it's fine.
Okay.
Just whatever it is, let it out.
I hate him so much.
Yeah, I mean we all do because we've not had this in a long time. Now the one thing I do tell people to sort of put their mind at ease is, and you know, Kadin, I'll tell you this because you know you seem to be of that same mindset. Is like I just told them, you know, we're about in the same position we were in around 2004. Yeah, that was when he won the second term.
That was Bush's second term.
Yeah, 04 to 08. We were in about this same position. Republican Congress, Republican president, majority Republican governors. Yeah, it was this same situation we're in now. The thing I try to remind people your age is what isn't the same as back then is public support.
Exactly. Is
public opinion, because I don't have the exact statistics in front of me, but the approval of being gay, and I know that's a very terrible way to word that, but just approval of the LGBT community overall has more than doubled in that time frame. So, you know, we've got people that, yeah, they voted for Trump. They didn't vote for Trump because they hate gay people. They just, whatever it was about what he said spoke to them, because they don't necessarily care about our rights. They just care that he said he's going to get their job back from China. Now, can he do that? Heck no, he can't do that. But they don't know that. But they voted for their interests. It's not a matter of I'm voting for Trump because I want him to get rid of all the gay people or whatever. So the thing to remember is, yes, we've got this legislation or this legislature that is kind of against us now. We have a president and a vice president that are starkly against us at this point, but we still have an America that is by and large on our side. And that's the real key to take away from that. So what I want to bring up now is a good friend of mine, his name is Michael. He taught me long ago that Pride is a parade because it used to be a march. So it was the fact that we can throw confetti now because we threw bricks back then. We ride on floats because we had to ride in paddy wagons. So two questions stem from that. One, do you see a backslide into those days? And do you think Pride needs to go back to being a march again?
LA Pride does not exist this year. LA Pride changed it to the LA March. So the answer to that question is yes. The political activism, the opponent, the resistance will be very visible for the next period of time. The key will be the 2018 election. Anybody who's listening to this, if you're not registered to vote, you're part of the problem. If you don't vote, you're part of the problem.
Preach!
And if the elections in 2018 will change at least one of the chambers of Congress in Washington, we'll be in good shape. North Carolina has no hope of changing either the House or the Senate from Republican to Democrat.
Even with the Supreme Court decision on redistricting?
Correct. I don't think there's any hope of changing that, but I think there is hope of no longer having a veto-proof legislature. So with Governor Cooper, when the legislature actually is redone is also critical. I'm hoping it'll be this year, but I kind of doubt it. It's already June. So we'll probably have elections as scheduled in November of 2018. And we can get below 72 Republicans in the House of Representatives or below 30, whatever the number is in the Senate, will be good to have a veto-proof legislature, which means the governor can stop some of the crap. But until then, we just have to hold on tight.
And the sad thing I take away, because I feel the same way you do on that, the sad takeaway I have from that is we went from feeling this unstoppable momentum forward to we're just trying to stop the bleeding.
Right.
Like that, right now it's trying to put bandages on. It's not trying to progress, and it's a very defeating feeling to have that notion that we were just rolling along, and not only did we come to a stop, but now we're having to fight just as hard, if not harder, just to not lose what we got.
Correct. I think everything has a backlash, right? What we're experiencing right now is the backlash from all the progress we made in the last decade or so. And society will continue to move forward, I believe. But it doesn't move forward by people being complacent. So if we have to start throwing bricks again, if we have to start marching instead of being in parades, by gosh, we're going to do it, right? Let's hope we don't have to. But I think society right now has changed enough that we'll go there if we have to.
So I keep saying this year I'm either not going to do parades or my parade will be in protest somehow. It's like, don't just walk down the street waving flags and throwing confetti and dancing like we used to.
Right.
Parades are for victories, and you don't celebrate a victory during the war.
There was an energy in Washington this past weekend that was not at any of the recent North Carolina prides or any of the Catawba Valley prides. And I would be a little surprised if we don't see an uptick in participation in September in the Catawba Valley Pride. Because people who were complacent in 2016 may not be complacent in 2017.
Right.
And I think, again, it's not all doom and gloom. We have to remember that the candidate that was espousing gay rights won by 3 million votes. Had it been a national election, the current president would not be president.
Had it not been rigged by Russia.
Well, no. I
It's
disagree
possible.
with you
It's
there.
possible.
I think she ran a horrendous campaign.
Well, this is true.
And
And
she
the DNC
lost she
terrible.
lost the states that she should have won, which would have switched the Electoral College. We elect the president in the Electoral College, not by popular vote. And Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania elected number 45. I don't call him by name. And those are Democrat states.
I call them a few names, but they're not appropriate for the show.
But again, I totally agree with Michael that the country is not going to let that many bad things happen. Negative things are happening. We have disappeared from all federal surveys. Trans rights and school systems are gone. They're just not there. as far as the federal government is concerned. Now, individual school systems, individual states may still have them, but a state like North Carolina is stuck with a Republican legislature and a federal government that's not going to do anything for at least another 18 months. So keep your fingers crossed.
All right, so final thought from each of you. Tell me your dream about Pride 10 years from now. What you, and by dream I don't mean what you wish it would be. Tell me what you think it'll be. 10 years from now, when you go to a march or a rally or a celebration parade, whatever the case may be, what do you see, what do you envision that would be different from today for good or ill? Kadin, we'll start with you.
Definitely think it would be a all-out celebration instead of turning back into a march.
Yeah, I agree. I think I would like to not call it Pride in 10 years. I think that confuses a lot of straight people. I'm constantly trying to explain it, but
that's not the only thing that confuses a lot of straight people.
But yeah, I would like it to be a celebration, but that I think we're going to get there. And I think as quickly as society has changed in the last decade, even with the government and the state it's in, we're still going to move forward, because we're not going to let it as a society move backwards. So I think in 10 years, it'll be more of a celebration. I agree.
I'm hopeful that in 10 years, it'll be a celebration of the entire LGBT community. We have every phobia that's in society within the community. And I would like to see some work done on breaking down some of the current barriers that exist within the LGBT community, so that it is a celebration of the entire community, people of color, people who come in from different ethnicities, people who have different gender identities or no gender identity. All of that is broadly within the LGBT community, because we are everywhere. And I think as we deal with our internal fusses and divisions, we can show society how to deal with those broader fusses and divisions that are out there. I would love to see that.
See, when I think about 10 years from now, and especially in the context of what I'm seeing seeded now in the movements that I'm going to and the rallies that I attend, 10 years from now, I see a Pride that is even more proud. Sorry to rain on that, but for that reason of, we're going to be in this situation, this darkness, for at least a few more years. So when we get to that 10 years from now point, this is not going to be that far in the past. So we're going to beat it. We're going to get through this, stronger than we've ever been. But that notion is going to make us even more emboldened in how proud we are to be who we are. Mm-hmm. Now, beyond that, though, Pride does have its issues. And a lot of them stem from the focus on white gay men, basically. It's the poster child that never does not have the spotlight on it. And when you consider the fact that trans people are less accepted than gay people, again, there's not outright acceptance of all around, but there is more acceptance for homosexuality than for gender identity. And also when I consider that transgender women of color are the most at-risk demographic in the country,
right? Period,
bar none. I want to see a Pride that embraces that admits that, and puts more emphasis on those aspects of the community that haven't had the spotlight on them for a while. So I would like to see, more trans representation at Pride. I would like to see more diversity at Pride, not just Black, but Latinx and Asian, any other ethnicity, because there has been just such a cultural whitewashing of it. I want to see that not only stop but reverse for a while to sort of balance it. I think you will, Faith. Again, I worked with Equality North Carolina from 2003 until 2008. And 12, 15 years ago,
we could not find, except rarely, a trans person who would be on even the board of directors or would do anything. And I totally understood why. 15 years ago, what a trans person most wanted was to transition and pass. And if they did something after they transitioned, then they were calling attention to themselves and they were no longer passing. And that was uncomfortable because society was even less accepting 15 years ago than it is now. Now that there are visible trans people who are in leadership roles, you being one, something like this podcast, that means the next trans person has something to build on. And that was not true 15 years ago as much as it is today. There were some trans people who were willing to do it, but they were few and far between. Now that's no longer the case. There are more trans people who are willing to be visible, and therefore society will come to accept that quicker because they are visible.
And listeners, I want to see your comments. Please type in below this show if you're watching on Facebook. If you're watching on YouTube right now. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings on Pride, both in the past and the future? Discuss with other generations that you may be talking with on there. Get to know different people, different views of what Pride means to people. Because the reason why it is LGBT is, our unifying thing, because gender identity and sexual orientation are two different things. But what unifies us, the reason why we should be in this movement together, is we share a common understanding of discrimination.
Right.
They who hate us lumped us together. So we found strength in numbers.
Right.
So listeners, I want to see your thoughts on Pride. Feel free to send us anything in the comments. If you have anything you want to hear on the air, if there's a show topic idea you've got, find us on Facebook or Twitter at Outright On Air. My thanks to my panel, Kadin, Michael, Ed. Thank you all so much for being with us. I'm Faith, your host for this evening, and we will see you next time. Goodbye.